All right, welcome everybody. We're here to. I told you I was going to put a video lecturette. So usually these are very short because of my camera. I can't do very long videos, but I wanted to touch base. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for working online for this week, and we'll do this once a month until the end of the semester, and I think it'll be successful. It gives you a time to work online a little bit. And also in terms of our videos, for example, for this week I'm going to have a YouTube, maybe two sections of YouTubes on a topic that we're dealing with the Chapter 5 on domestic violence. And so today what I want to briefly touch base on, as you know, my pet is the sociological theories. And as I said before, you'll get to know these theories pretty well before the end of the semester because we use the same ones, same logic basically for each of these case studies. So I want to briefly go over some of this material with you, sort of just a read along. I'm going to start on page 122, starting with looking at the theories of domestic violence and exchange social control model, and go through some of these. So bear with me. I want to, I'll read some main points here and then maybe make some comments to help clarify. Most of these make common sense to us, I think, once we get the logic of the theories down. And again, each one of these tries to give an explanation for whatever the case study may be. In this case, domestic violence. And they all have their own various takes, and what we take from them as students of sociology is that each one of these does give us some insight on complex issues such as domestic violence. None of these explain them in total, but when we look at all of them, it gives us a good viewpoint from which to theorize and to analyze domestic violence, for example, and all the other cases that we'll see. I also want to touch base, say a few things about your paper topics are coming due, and I want you to start thinking about what you would like to do, and I also have some framework for topics that are that I'd rather see than some I would rather not see. So I want to stress what that is, what those are, and then I'll tell you about your YouTube, and then also readings for next week. So we're just going to walk through some of these theories just to refresh, and I just wanted to give a little bit more background to just help you understand the logic. Main thing with theoretical understanding is if you know the underpinnings, presuppositions of the theory themselves, then it's kind of like plugging in the case study. You'll follow out the logic of the model itself. So starting with page 122 on the theories of domestic violence, exchange and social control theory. Richard Gales. Exchange theory in sociology is a broad theory that can be used to explain many other social phenomena. It was started by a theorist by the name of George Homans. You don't need to know that. But the basics of the theory is based on a credit-debit model. So it really is an economic model that's been applied to social relations. And like all theories, it's got some very insightful aspects, but also all of these have limitations and some problematic aspects to them. But it says Richard Gales has integrated exchange and social control formalizations to account for violence in the family. Exchange theory posits that human social behavior is motivated by the desire to maximize rewards, credits, right, and minimize punishment, debits. And so when one outweighs the other, that's going to affect the outcome of the behavior, or it's going to shape the behavior. So it's a rewards cost model, right? It's very simple, actually. If others provide benefit to an individual, that is, give credits for behaving in a certain way, then he or she will tend to continue that behavior. It's sort of a behavioristic kind of model as well. The continuation of the social interaction then depends on the extent of reciprocity involved. However, if there is an absence of reciprocity, of give and take, between the interactive partners, then interpersonal conflict and violence may well ensue. So, the importance of reciprocity in relationships. If one person is getting a lot more out of the relationship than the other person, then conflict is going to ensue. There's a sense of unfairness. And of course, you have on page 123, you have this, and this is a good, once you study these, come back to your table of theories, because they kind of give you the gist of each of these. It says that if the perceived benefits for assaulting a family member, exertion of control and dominance, and the immediate release of tension outweighs the potential costs, public disgrace, arrest, or abandonment, then domestic violence is more probable. In addition, the social control formalization proposes family violence is more likely when there is an absence of social controls which would bind people to the social order and negatively sanction family members for acts of violence. So just give a quick summation. Gales summarizes his exchange social control formalization in the following three propositions. And here again is the three theoretical propositions that is what I really want you to pay attention to. One, family members are more likely to use violence in the home when they expect the cost of being violent are less than the rewards. The absence of effective social controls, number two, the absence of effective social controls over family relations decreases the costs of one family member being violent toward another. Certain social and family structures serve to reduce social control in family relations and therefore reduce the costs or increase the rewards of being violent. Gales also argues that three social conditions increase the likelihood of violence within the home, and these are important for tests: privacy, inequality, and the cultural link between violence and being a real man. And I'm going to stress this one because we're going to watch some video clips. I can't show you the whole video, and it's not online. But I want to show you some clips from a video. I'll talk about that in just a bit here. But the logic of privacy, what occurs within the confines of the U.S. home is largely a private matter. Wide discretion in the forms that interaction between family members may take is socially and legally permissible. Wives and husbands, children, and grandparents may act toward one another in the privacy of their homes in ways that are inappropriate in a public setting and legally sanctioned if directed towards someone outside the family. So domestic privacy has always been a big problem in terms of domestic violence, as the family as a social institution is very vulnerable to the larger stresses that society provides to its or places on its members. So if you will, another way to think about the family in terms of privacy, the notion of the scapegoat. A lot of family members will come home and maybe they're dealing with stresses in their job environment, the economic conditions, problems relationship with bosses, or at school, problems with relations with professors and the stress of going to school. The home is as an institution, it provides that privacy area where all those problems, you've heard all this, people shouldn't bring work home with them, you bring your stresses into the home. And then we scapegoat, so the term scapegoating, we take frustrations out in the privacy of the family, out of sight, out of mind kind of deal, and we scapegoat our frustrations onto weaker others in the family, such as possibly wives, children, or grandparents that may be living in the home. Domestic privacy then limits the extent of social control over family interaction. Both formal and informal means of control are used less frequently with less severe sanctions in matters involving domestic violence. We have a long history legally of protecting the notion that the home is the man's kingdom, if you will, and what goes in the home is not to be shared outside the home. And so domestic violence has a long history of being not accepted as much. Of course, there's some subcultures that accept violence in the family, but just being an institution that's not policed so heavily historically. Certainly more so today as domestic violence has come to the fore, even even as we speak right now in the media, right, with this stuff going on with these cases of the football players and family violence. We'll talk about that some more. Except in rare instances, neighbors are reluctant to interfere in family altercations. Law enforcement agencies are restricted by specific guidelines for dealing with calls involving domestic violence. As a consequence, there is an absence of social controls over intrafamilial matters that increase the opportunity for assaultive behavior in the home. So that's privacy is a real big issue here for Gales. Another one is inequality. Families are typically characterized by inequality among its members. So there can be stark status differentials within the family itself. Historically, it's been that males as the dominant gender plays a dominant role within the family, especially if they had a socialization in the past towards the man as the head of the roost, if you will, and a man should be dominant in all situations, especially the family. Status differences between spouses flow from the economic resources of husband and wives. His husbands have historically had the higher paying jobs with more social prestige than their wives. There's a wide status differences are evident between parents and their offspring, for sure. For example, we don't, we as parents, we don't tend to give our children free access to our checking accounts, right? Maybe some people do. I haven't met somebody yet. Maybe some wealthy folks. I don't know. But most children are, in terms of the economic equality in the household, tend to they're on the lower scale. If they don't have access to the scarce resources in terms of the purse, if you will, in the family. So husbands often pay higher paying jobs. Children also don't have access to scarce resources within the family in terms of being able to be in a dominant position. So we're talking of physically weaker, economically dependent, without ready access to guardians outside the home. These inequities serve to structure offender-victim relations and domestic violence. The victimization of women and children is not only more frequent, but the physical and psychological consequences are more severe. Then on page 126 there in the middle, it's got violent behavior in the real man. And this is what the topic of the video I'm going to provide for your comments. The U.S. culture provides considerable support for the belief that real, quote-unquote, real men are also violent men. Men are culturally expected to be decisive, act aggressively, and appreciate competitive and violent sports. This is particularly true of men who live in subcultures of violence, where violence is seen as a viable means to settling disputes. In the home, men are considered the head of the household, and as such, they control important decisions, and they expect to be treated with deference and respect. So this ties into this whole notion of patriarchy from the feminist perspective, in that males being dominant in our society, we live in a subculture, or we live in a national culture in which males are socialized into a violent outlook, or competitive value system. They're expected to be tough guys, basically. And The video clips I'm going to show you is from the excellent, very, very popular on college campuses, university campuses, the video documentary called Tough Guys. And what I'll do is I'll put one or two sections up on the from the YouTube. I'll have them up for you to under our content area. I'll put those videos for you to watch, and then I'll have a little discussion place on discussion board for you to make your comments about those videos in relation to what we're studying this week, domestic violence. But he has this overall theme that males are normally socialized towards being violent. Violent masculinity, his thesis on violent masculinity comes from the cultural surround and how males are socialized through the family, through school, but especially through popular culture, through the media. So movies and games, and also our sports culture, also our the connection between being a man and weapons, guns in our society. And also the hyper masculinity. In his latest version, which you can't really get on YouTube at this point, they may have an introduction to it. He talks about hyper masculinity and how males have increasingly, there's this cultural expectation for males to be super masculine, if you will, very violent, very, in terms of physique, very muscular. You see these very big muscular guys, and just more extreme forms of violence that we see today that maybe we didn't see even a decade ago. It's increasingly becoming more violent, and his thesis is then applied to show things such as, to help explain things such as all these school shootings, these rampages that these males go on. Not most of the time, most of the time white males that do all these violent acts in schools, and he says this comes from this hyper masculinity. And kids don't fit up. It's a norm in our society. So he says that males in our society are socialized in a normal fashion, but ironically, it leads toward, shapes behavior towards a violent outcome, if you will. Doesn't mean that that always causes violence, but it shapes and allows for the display of violent behavior among males in our culture. So I'll let you know more about that here in a second. Then you have the power dominance theory, and Murray Straus and his colleagues in the Family Violence Research Program. The experience of stress in everyday life impacts life within the family. Stress and conflict experienced in the workplace or school, in the neighborhood or community, or in the larger society may well affect the behavior of the family members towards one another. Again, this goes back to the scapegoat theory. Consequences of socioeconomic inequality add further to the stress generated by daily interactions outside the family. So the lack of job opportunities or stability is a primary source of stress within the family. Certainly so. Marital conflict often is precipitated by financial problems. I think most of us can understand this, with few prospects for economic recovery or stability. Yet, Straus and his colleagues argue that stress experienced by family members does not adequately account for domestic violence, when husbands and wives have also been violently victimized or witnessed violence in their own family of origin. So what he's doing is introducing some intervening variables here. He's saying that economic stress does not directly cause family violence. There's these other variables that have to be in place. And he says these are when husbands and wives have been violently victimized or witnessed violence in their own family of origin. Excuse me. Or when the family is immersed in a subculture of violence that legitimates the use of violence. Or thirdly, the chances that familial stress will erupt in a violent altercation are greatly increased. Power theory takes into account a myriad of social conditions that generate stress for family members. But these intervening variables are important. So if you grew up so even if your family, if there's a lot of stress because of economic conditions, does not necessarily mean it's going to lead to violence unless there's some of these intervening variables, such as having grown up in a family of origin where the woman is exposed to a violence as victim or as witness. Also, to be immersed in a subculture of violence where, the cultural surround people that differential association theory. People grow up with, and maybe it's a lower class community the way a lot of these theories go, who rely on violence to settle their disputes. The subculture of violence, much more likely than to act in a violent manner in the home. So there's more than just one variable, there's several variables. The feminist theory, again, is looking at, and if you notice, several of these theories are all pointing towards the male socialization into a subculture of violence, dominance, the normal expectations for males in our society that lead to violent behavior. Feminist theorists focus on their attention on the patriarchal structure of society to explain violence in men. Males dominance is the key to understand the victimization of wives, and men, it is argued, set expectations for the behavior of their intimate partners. When these women fail to live up to these expectations, men resort to violence to establish their position of dominance in the relationship. A husband and wife team of the Bosches, a husband and wife team of feminist researchers from Wales, argue that men learn to use physical force largely by participating in a violent male subculture. Again, the subject matter of the Tough Guys video, as you will see. Then we have subculture of violence. What I'm going to do is go back over to our schematic on table 5.3, page 123, and look just to save us some time here. Subcultures of Violence by Wolfgang and Ferricuddy. Participation in subcultures of violence increases the acceptance of subcultural customs and values for violence as a response to frustrating conditions. Acceptance of such values increases the likelihood of committing domestic violence. So subcultures of violence, people are normally socialized into a subculture of violence that provides the customary ways of doing things, values, I would say custom values for violence as a response to frustrating conditions. And by acceptance of such values increases the likelihood of committing domestic violence. Social learning theorists, Akers, differential reinforcement. Individuals who hold attitudes that disapprove of domestic violence are less likely to commit domestic violence. So again, it's looking at the people that we surround ourselves with, the groups that we've been socialized into. If they don't approve of domestic violence, then we are much less likely to engage in domestic violence. The greater the cost for domestic violence, the less likely the individual is to commit domestic violence. So in some sense it's related. These theories don't always stand apart from each other. There's elements, for example, right here I'm reading in, we can read in some of the logic of exchange theory, for example. The greater the cost, right? The debit for domestic violence, the less likely the individual is to commit domestic violence. So it's differential association theory, a little bit, he has this extra concept, differential reinforcement. Glaser, differential identification. Individuals more likely to commit domestic violence if they identify with another person who views domestic violence as acceptable. Differential association. So if that individual has a strong identity with others who approve of using violence as in domestic situations, then they're more likely to commit domestic violence as a sort of, again, a sort of reward system. And it's sort of logical. Individuals are likely to commit domestic violence if we identify with certain individual or other persons. If we identify with them, then they become somewhat of a reference for our own behaviors. Someone we maybe look up to, and we have the same. If we don't identify with them, we're much less likely. So, if your father was very abusive and you didn't identify with your father all that strongly, then you're more or less likely to engage in family violence than someone who really identified very strongly with the father figure. Again, routine activities theory, Cohen and Felsen, motivated offender, suitable target, absence of a guardian, and he uses all three of these to look at the isolation of the family as an institution. So domestic violence is likely to occur when there is a suitable target, usually the weaker partners in the situation, women, children, grandparents. The offender is motivated, so the offender is under stress, and they want to take that stress out, scapegoat by physically assaulting weaker members of the family, and a lack of a capable guardian. Again, the lack of a capable guardian goes back to the earlier formalization we were talking about the lack, in terms of the family as an institution, the lack of social controls in terms of outside influence on the family, for example. So it makes sense for us. Control exchange theory, again, we just talked about that one. Gales, inequality, privacy. Agnew's stress, strain and stress. The greater the strain experienced by an individual, the greater the experience of negative emotions. The greater the negative emotional experience, the more likely an individual will commit domestic violence. So the general strain theory about general, again, stress, the relationship between strain and stress. And then the more the stress that's experienced, the more likelihood of domestic violence. Of course, read all of these in the chapter to get some more of the gray areas of understanding the theories. But these are the major hypotheses. But stress and strain for Agnew, for self-control theory by Godfredson and Hershey. Self-control theory, the greater the individual's self-control, the lower the probability of engaging in domestic violence. The greater individual's self-control. And that self-control again goes back to the issue of one's socialization, one's cultural capital, if you will. Individuals who lack self-control, who maybe grew up in a culture that stresses more immediate gratification, want it now, or short, or also short. What am I looking for? Short paths to settling disputes. Again, that subculture violence. That violence can settle a dispute instead of any complexity in terms of trying to make arguments or to find some kind of negotiative solution to the situation. And this has again, as I say, some of these theories have a bias, and to some extent, some of these theories have a bias towards the lower working class. Self-control is seen among the lower classes as being somewhat less than those who are of college-educated background, but not always. There's problems with that notion. So self-control can also be a product, it can be a product of religious background, for example. Religious social control through religious socialization. For many individuals can produce a strong sense of self-control. Dollard and colleagues, frustration aggression theory. Higher levels of frustration increase levels of aggression. So the more individuals are frustrated in their normal pursuits and they're frustrated, it increases their aggressiveness. Increased levels of aggression are likely to result in domestic violence. Again, it says likely because most of these theories are not saying a direct one-to-one correspondence that A will 100% lead to B, right? Sociology is not an exact science. But there's a higher statistical probability. Higher levels of frustration an individual has experienced will increase the levels of aggression. And increased levels of aggression are likely, has a higher probability to result in domestic violence. And then unreciprocity by Palmer. Unreciprocity increases levels of frustration. That is, in relationships, when one person is getting more, think of your exchange theory. One person is getting more rewards while the other's wants and needs are being forfeited, if you will, frustrated. So this unequal reciprocity increases levels of frustration. Increased levels of frustration are likely to result in higher levels of domestic violence. Okay, so these are just sort of just an overview. Go ahead and study these and read each of these and look at some of the main points for each of these theories. And now, what I want to do now, while we still have time, is I'll put a couple of YouTubes from the documentary Tough Guys that touches base with several of our theories on domestic violence. And what I wanted to say is that once you've seen those, you can certainly go back and you can go back to the YouTube and see more you can see more sections of the documentary if you want to see more of those. And also you can see Jack Katz, who's the narrator. He's one of the best anti-violence activists out there today. You can see some of his other videos in other context, speeches and in conferences dealing with this topic of the tough guys. So that said, what I want to do with, I'm going to have certain readings. I'm going to send an email out with the readings for next week, chapter 6. And so what I'd like to ask of you is, I've had one volunteer already who wants to volunteer and do an article for us next week. So next week's on suicide and life-threatening behaviors. So if any of the rest of you would like to volunteer to do one, please just shoot me an email and say, hey, I'd like to volunteer for one of the articles. And then if everybody volunteers, then I won't have to assign. Of course, if nobody volunteers for all of the articles for next week, then I'll have to assign those. But I would rather you volunteer if you really want to do one. Let's look at some of the new folks. Of course, if you've done one, you want to do another one, that's fine with me. But I want some of the new folks also to come forward. And if you haven't done one, this is a good time. You might as well go ahead and jump in because you're going to have to do one anyway. So go ahead and volunteer. So what I'll do is I'll send out email with the topics, the articles we're going to do for next week, and then you can choose one of those. Send me an email for your volunteering for want to present one of those. And again, if I don't hear from anybody by the end of the weekend, then I'll go ahead and assign. In terms of your papers, let me just go ahead and make this comment. Please go ahead and think about two or three topics you may be interested in doing, and then next week write those down for me and turn those in, and I'm very happy to help you shape that topic, help you choose one, help you narrow it down. But here are a couple of things that are important for me in terms of my expectations. One is I don't want papers that are very they're so broad. For example, just take some like domestic violence. I don't want you to take these larger umbrella case studies and just talk about them, and that I want them more focused than that. So what I would rather you do is to do more of a case study. Now certainly you can use these topics that we're looking at, but formulate a paper around a case study. So for example, very timely right now, if you want to look at domestic violence, look at our theories and you want to apply them, you could You could do a paper on the current problems of the tough guys, perhaps. You could look at the sports culture, and then you could look at these guys right now that are in trouble for domestic violence, wife abuse, and child abuse right now going on in the NFL. That's a case study. You're utilizing the theories in one of our topics to look at a case. Right? That's what I want you to focus on. And even for the cases, this one's very timely, so it's wide open. So I think it's a very permissible topic to work on. But if it's some older case that we've seen it on TV a million times, and we already know the outcome of that case, and it's not a very uncommon case, and I'd rather you not avoid that. But certainly find cases that you can focus on. Another area that you can think about is I do enjoy also papers that focus on those gray areas of deviance. That's why I introduced this reader. There's a lot of case studies here that sort of skirt the boundaries between or there's ongoing conflict over, is this behavior, is this deviant behavior, or is it normal behavior, or there's infighting going on. A struggle over the meaning, because that's an area that I'm very interested in. My whole dissertation was over the struggle over meaning of what it means to be a real Native American. That was the heart of my 250-page book now. So I'm very, very interested in the struggles over what things mean. Like right now with ISIS and this notion of going to war again in the Middle East. What does it mean? And for me, people are struggling right now what that situation means. Excuse me, but in terms of our subject matter, there's a lot of gray areas out there that you could focus on. So you would do a paper that was like a pro-con approach. You'd get the pros of that situation, like for example the ongoing debate about pro-life, right, or women's choice. Two different ways. One sees abortion as legitimate, the other sees it as deviant behavior. There's a whole lot of cases that you can think about those where people right now are struggling over the meanings. As marijuana, for example, is that deviant behavior to smoke marijuana, or is it, as some groups and states have come to the conclusion that it's not any longer, and it should be legalized. So there you go. You have a debate over this, whether it's deviant or if it's not deviant. There's a lot of great case studies you could do around this particular dichotomy, if you will. And what you would do is look at not give your opinion, but look at how those on the pro side, how they construct their message, and then look at those on the con side and see how they construct their message. What's their message about? How do they, if they say that abortion is deviance, how so? In what ways? What does it mean? What is the basic underlying premise there? I give you a lot of lateral room here to work with, but there are some of these limitations. Go ahead and think about your paper. I'm going to cut this off where I lose this, so I'll see you guys in class, and I'm going to upload this for you, and you can watch it anytime you want to, actually. All right, so, hey, I'll see you guys in class next Thursday. Be there. Bye.